Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Alla Leukavets, and I'm currently working at the Center for Strategic and Foreign Policy Studies in Minsk, Belarus. And today I would like to talk about the book, which is the result of my PhD work, the work that I did in Germany around 2 years ago. I started in 2013 and I finished around 2017. I did my PhD within a Marie Curie program named Post-Soviet Tensions. And the PhD was accomplished at two universities, University of Bremen and Jacobs University. So the title of the book is Integration Policies of Ukraine and Belarus vis-à-vis the European Union and Russia. The book deals with two main research areas, integration studies as well as foreign policy analysis of post-Soviet states. So what is the book about? The main goal that I set in the work is to do a comparative analysis of integration policies of two post-Soviet countries over the last 25 years. So basically from the collapse of the Soviet Union, starting in 1991 till 2016. So 25 years, this is my time frame. And in this book, I aim to address the following long-established empirical puzzle. Why Belarus and Ukraine, which at the starting point of analysis, meaning in 1991, they shared a lot of structural similarities, they inherited similar post-Soviet legacies, they had a comparable socioeconomic profile, but in spite of these commonalities, they decided to do totally opposite integration choices. Whereas Belarus, from the early on, opted for closer integration with Russia, Ukraine, after 20 years of balancing between two integration offers, in 2014 rejected Russia's integration offer and started closer alignment, closer approximation with the European Union. So while most of the scholars so far have approached this topic from the standpoint of the external actors, meaning the European Union and Russia, I propose to shift the focus of analysis. And I claim that analyzing systematic analysis of perspectives of small states, Eastern Partnership countries, can provide additional insights. So basically, I think that this book can be relevant for different types of audience. It can be interesting for academics as well as policymakers, also students of international relations, and even general public who might be interested in how and why the crisis in Ukraine started. One of the main variables, to use scientific language, in my research is the integration offer. So Russia's integration offer consists of the following components: CIS, Commonwealth of Independent States, CIS FTA, Free Trade Area, Union State of Russia and Belarus, Eurozec, Eurasian Economic Community, CES, Single Economic Space, Customs Union, and finally Eurasian Economic Union. So how did Belarus accept these components? Belarus fully accepted all of these components, which allows us to make a conclusion that Belarus integration stance over the whole analyzed time frame has been pro-Russian. If we look at Ukraine, we can see that Ukraine has used a selective approach vis-à-vis integration with Russia. For example, Ukraine never became a full member of the CIS. It never signed the charter of this organization. Ukraine got only an observer status in Eurozec and also in the Eurasian Economic in Eurozec. It also didn't join the Single Economic Space. It fully joined the CIS FTA in 2011. Because Ukraine, the primary motivation of Ukraine in integration with Russia was to get free trade without exemptions. And CIS FTA fully allowed Ukraine to do this. If we look at the opposite side of the medal, at the integration of these two countries vis-à-vis EU, we can also see some differences in the approaches these two countries used. EU's integration offer consisted of such components as ECA, Partnership and Cooperation Agreement, ENP, European Neighbourhood Policy, EAP, Eastern Partnership, and finally Association Agreement, which includes the political part and the economic part, which we all know with the abbreviation DCFTA, Deep and Comprehensive Free Trade Area. So if we look at Belarus, Belarus literally has the minimal engagement with the European Union. Belarus only signed the PCA but never ratified it. The ratification was actually frozen as a result of the authoritarian trends in the country. Belarus was included in the European Neighbourhood Policy, but no action plan was enacted. Belarus was also invited to join the Eastern Partnership program, but only in the multilateral part of this program. There is still no association agreement between Belarus and the EU, although in the recent years we have witnessed some of the improvements in the relations between Belarus and Ukraine as a result of the crisis. In fact, Belarus and the EU as a result of the crisis in Ukraine. In fact, maybe I can talk in more detail about that later. So if we look at Ukraine and how this country integrated with the EU, we can see that it has fully accepted the EU's integration offer. Ukraine was one of the first post-Soviet countries to start the negotiations on the PCA. Ukraine was, of course, accepted into the ENP, became a full member of the ENP, and enjoyed, in fact, the highest financial benefits from the EU within the ENP financial instruments. Ukraine, even before the Eastern Partnership was enacted, Ukraine already started negotiations on the association agreement. And as we can see, it has finally ratified association agreement, both parts of it, political and economic, and has already started the implementation of the DCFTA. So to conclude, we can say that over the analyzed time frame, Belarus' stance vis-à-vis both external actors was pro-Russian, while Ukraine has partly accepted some of the components of Russia's integration offer and fully accepted EU's offer, which allows us to conclude that it had a multi-vector integration stance. But in 2014, it rejected Russia's integration offer, it did not join the Eurasian Economic Union, and signed, ratified the association agreement, started close integration with the EU. Well, if we look at the economic dimension, I don't think that Lukashenko is thinking along those lines. Why? Because over the last 25 years, Russia has literally subsidized the economy of Belarus with cheap energy. Belarus has always had the lowest prices for gas and oil from among all the post-Soviet countries. Russia has also given Belarus unprecedented financial support, such as loans and preferential conditions. And it was enough for the regime, for Lukashenko's regime to survive. So Lukashenko up till now was quite happy with this state of affairs. Why Lukashenko cannot think about signing and following Ukraine's pathway vis-à-vis the EU, because the EU's offer comes with a conditionality. EU offers integration in exchange for certain democratic reforms, and these reforms can be detrimental for Lukashenko's regime. So, of course, he cannot go as far as Ukraine has done vis-à-vis the EU. But of course, I think that he also understands that it's important to diversify his partners. And this is what we can see in the recent years. He is trying to make these moves to diversify his relations, not focusing only on Russia, but also to develop relations with China and also with the European Union. But I think it's too premature to talk, it's too early to talk about Belarus being able to sign the association agreement, including the DCFTA, Deep and Comprehensive Free Trade Agreement. Yeah, well, my research uses qualitative methodology, and I used several methods: document analysis and semi-structured interviews, elite interviews. And I think one of the interesting, I don't know, not findings, but perhaps it was just what was interesting about data gathering and analysis was the interview part. When I did my research stay in Washington, D.C., I had a chance to talk, in fact, with one of the former ministers of foreign affairs of Russia. I was fortunate enough to hear his version of how the Soviet Union collapsed, of how the CIS was created, what were the interests and motivations of different countries in this process. Also, it was quite insightful to talk to officials from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Belarus, those who work at the ministry now, and I also had a chance to talk to the former official from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and to compare their viewpoints. That was also quite an interesting exercise because the points of view were totally opposite. Right, so I think the interviews was one of the interesting parts of doing this research. I think there is a lot going on vis-à-vis China now. Belarus, you might have heard about this project, One Belt, One Road. And Belarus has started actively to participate in this project. And interestingly enough, what we might witness in the future is that there might be intensification of bloc-to-bloc relations between the European Union and the Eurasian Economic Union, because Belarus is part of the Eurasian Economic Union, and it has already started to cooperate, for example, with Poland on some of the infrastructure projects within the OBOR, One Belt, One Road initiative. So perhaps this might have certain positive consequences for Russia. It might increase its bargaining position vis-à-vis the West, vis-à-vis the European Union. Yeah. So, but if just once again to repeat, I think Belarus is focusing a lot on strengthening its vector with China, its Asian vector with China, especially within this project, One Belt, One Road project. Yes, absolutely. So as I have already mentioned, EU attaches this democratic clause to its trade policies. And this is a decisive factor for choosing those countries with whom you will cooperate or not. So I think the main explaining variable is, in fact, for these different integration stances, is the political regime. We have hybrid regime in Ukraine, or competitive authoritarian regime, according to Levitsky and Wei's terminology, and we have consolidated authoritarianism in Belarus, and this has a drastic effect on the relations of these countries with external actors. If I may say a couple of words about what implications it has theoretically, I will mention that political regime has a direct effect on the size of the windset of a country. What is a windset? Windset, it is the, let's say, all the international agreements that can be ratified on the domestic level, according to the two-level game framework, which I use. This might be more interesting for the academic part of the audience. So windset. If the country can ratify all types of agreements, the windset is large. If not, then the windset is small. So in case of Ukraine, we have heterogeneous interests in the windset. Basically, we have representatives of both Westernizers and Eurasianists among the domestic actors in Ukraine. So until 2014, the pragmatic camp of these two groups was in power. So the country couldn't radically shift either to the European Union or to Russia, because this would challenge the interests of the dominant power groups, of the oligarchs in the country. Some of them are interested in closer relations with the EU, the others with Russia. So the president, with such a political configuration, he has to balance between these two groups in order to ensure his re-election, elite support, and he has to pursue this multi-vector policy. Otherwise, if he miscalculates the size of his windset, then what happens? Either he loses power, which happened with Yanukovych, or he might pursue, for example, a pro-EU integration policy, but it would be declarative. This is what we witnessed during Yushchenko's presidential tenure. He tried to intensify the pro-EU vector, but he did not manage to do that. His policy was largely unsuccessful, resulting in declarative Europeanization. This is how this phenomenon was termed in academic discourse. In Belarus, in principle, on the domestic level, any option, if Lukashenko tomorrow decided to turn to the EU and democratize, this option would still be ratified on the domestic level. But because it's not beneficial for him, he pursues pro-Russian integration policy, and of course it is easily ratified in the parliament. It's supported by the population and other actors. And oligarchs, they are not that powerful in Belarus in comparison to Ukraine, so they cannot challenge the ruling regime. My findings relate to the research questions, which you can find in the introduction of my book. The overarching research question is: what factors have influenced the integration stances of Belarus and Ukraine vis-à-vis the European Union and Russia? And in order to address this question, I deconstructed into 4 additional ones. So the first sub-question looks at the extent of acceptance of the integration offers. I analyze how Belarus and how Ukraine have accepted these two offers over the last 25 years. The second sub-question looks at the domestic factors and scrutinizes the policy making in the countries. It compares different actors, different types of actors, looks at their preferences and interests, including the preferences and interests of mass public, oligarchs, as well as political elites. The third sub-question, looks at the international level of analysis, at the structural variables, and here you will find answers to the different levels of economic linkages that the two case countries have vis-à-vis the European Union and Russia, as well as costs and benefits of each of the integration offers. And finally, the fourth sub-question looks at how these different factors interrelate between each other by analyzing different integration games during this whole period, during the 25 years. As I have already said, this book targets different audiences, and it is relevant in several ways. First of all, it has a certain social relevance. It studies the phenomena which influences many people's lives. As I have already said, I started my PhD in 2013, at the time when the crisis in Ukraine started to brew. And basically, the genesis of this research was my curiosity that I had about how the crisis in Ukraine will develop and what consequences it will have for the other Eastern Partnership countries, for the rest of the Europe. And secondly, the book aims to lay down certain theoretical contributions. I have already mentioned that I'm using the two-level games approach, which was originally advanced by the Harvard scholar Robert Putnam, and he developed this approach for democratic states. But what I do in this research, I apply it to non-democratic regimes of different types, ranging from competitive authoritarianism in Ukraine to consolidated authoritarianism in Belarus, and see how this framework can be modified in order to provide better explanation for the struggles and challenges that these countries experience because of their positioning between the European Union and Russia. And because in the wake of the Ukraine crisis there has been proliferation of research on Ukraine, I think it's important to mention how this particular book is different from the other contributions. So first of all, it takes a comparative perspective. I look not only at the Ukraine's integration policy, but also Belarus, and this comparative perspective provides additional insights. Secondly, I look not only at the recent integration developments, which most of the research does, such as the Eurasian Economic Union and versus association agreement with the EU. I look at all the components of integration starting from early 90s. Well, first of all, I did this research in Germany, right? And I think that the academic environment in Belarus, fortunately, it doesn't put so much, as you said, censorship. So in academic environment, you're free to express what you think. I also started researching more on Belarus-China relations, as well as I have some experience in the Balkan region. I have spent some time in Serbia, so I think I will develop this direction of research as well within this center. Yeah? How Belarus relations with the Balkan states, because in fact we are having a lot of trade with Serbia. We are selling them a lot of our machines, buses, and Lukashenko is quite friendly with the authorities there. So the relations are quite good. It would be interesting to research that. I think that's an under-researched area. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And I hope it's not the last time.